Hey everyone, Kevin P. McAuliffe here, and I am back again with another Creative Cow tutorial. And in our next lesson, in our look at learning Avid's Media Composer and Symphony, we're going to take a look at the most important settings that you're going to need when working on your projects. And I'm talking about the keyboard settings. I'm going to show you not only how to customize your keyboard, but how you're going to be able to get in and customize the user interface so that you get the most out of your editing sessions. Okay, not a long introduction. Let's just get into Symphony and let's get started. Okay, so I'm going to Alt-Tab into Symphony, obviously a Command Tab for all my Mac friends out there. And you're going to see that we're going to pick up exactly where we left off from the last lesson. I already have a timeline here ready to go. Now obviously I want to get in and customize my keyboard. Now anyone that's coming over from Final Cut is going to know that customizing your keyboard is not always as easy as it might seem. Now what do I mean by that? Well, you'll remember from Final Cut. In Final Cut you could customize your standard keyboard. Then you can customize your Shift keyboard, your Alt keyboard, your Control keyboard, your Command keyboard, your Alt Shift, and there was literally so many possibilities that, to be perfectly honest, I never really used anything more than just the standard keyboard. Now in Media Composer it's a little bit different. We only really have two options. We have the standard keyboard layout and we have the Shift keyboard layout. Now where we find obviously the keyboard settings is again inside our Settings tab over here inside the project window. I'm just going to scroll right down here to keyboard. Now obviously we're skipping over a couple settings that we're going to come back to in a later lesson, but I wanted to get to this one because I thought it was exceptionally important that you understand it, especially if you want to get in and start editing. So what I'm going to do is simply double click on the keyboard. Now you're going to see that I have my keyboard already laid out, ready to go the way that I like to edit. Now let's talk a little bit about how we're going to get in and customize this keyboard. Now you'll remember, like I said before, we have two options. We have the standard keyboard, and you'll see if I hold Shift down, I have the Shift keyboard. Now, how do we get in and customize things? Because if you come from Final Cut, you'll know that normally we have another window over here that has all of the commands in it that we can use to map to our keyboard. But in this case, we don't, because we actually need another tool. Now, since it is a tool, we're probably going to find it right up here under the Tools drop-down, and it's called, appropriately enough, the Command Palette. Why is it called that? Well, it contains all of the commands that we're going to need to use when we're editing. And now getting in and actually taking these commands and dragging them into our keyboard is very easy. You'll see right now at the bottom I have three options. I have a button-to-button reassignment, I have the active palette, and I have a menu-to-button reassignment. Okay, let's talk about the first one first. Button-to-button reassignment. So let's assign the keyboard something that I use on a pretty much regular basis. Now it's something that you never really can see on a computer monitor, but you see it right away on a broadcast monitor. And what I like to do is to be able to step through the fields of video. Now in this case, because I'm working in 720p, I don't have fields, but most of the work I do is actually in 1080i interlaced. So fielding issues come up quite regularly, and I need to get in and step through field by field to see exactly what's going on in my shot. And I do have that mapped to my keyboard, and normally where I have it mapped is actually to the left and to the right arrow keys. Now you'll also see that as I drag the mouse over top of any one of these keyboard commands, you'll see that the tooltip pops up to tell me exactly what this shortcut does. Very handy. You're also going to notice that in some cases you may have one key mapped to a few different places on the keyboard. For example, we're all familiar with JKL editing. You'll notice that L is obviously to play forwards, but then again the space bar is also to play, but then again the number 5 key is to play again. Now for me, I really only use L to play anything on my timeline, so I could conceivably map these two keys to be something different. Now, I just want to stop for a second and I want to tell you the dangers of getting in and messing around with your standard keyboard. Because what I see a lot of people like to do is they like to come in, they sit down, and they completely change the layout of the keyboard. And I always tell editors that I train never to do that. Don't ever get in and change the keyboard. Now, why would you not do that? Well, you'll notice that in my keyboard layout, really the only thing that I've altered besides the left and right arrow keys, which we're about to do in a second, is the function keys at the top. And I've come in and I've added some commands inside when I hold Shift down on my keyboard. Really, the only thing I added, though, is Shift and Y as effects mode, and Shift F2 is to render. These other commands were already here. Now, why would I tell you not to get in and adjust anything on the keyboard? Well, If you're a freelance editor and you have to go from location to location to location to location, yeah, it's great, take your settings with you, and try to get them in. But the only problem with that is that I've noticed that settings can be very flaky based on the version of Media Composer that you happen to be running. So if you take your settings from, let's say, a version 6 all the way to a different version, let's say a version 4, or from a version 4 to a version 5, you sort of get the idea of where I'm going with this. I notice that your settings can be very flaky, and what I always find myself doing is just creating new settings from scratch. The only problem is that sitting down as a freelancer, I don't really have the luxury of time to sit down and remap every key on this keyboard. But you know what? I can get in and remap these 10 keys very quickly, as well as these 2 keys right here. I can do that in about 60 seconds, whereas to remap this entire keyboard could take 15 or 20 minutes. So guess what? I can get up and editing very quickly with the keyboard layout just the way it is. Why? Because this is the standard keyboard layout when you create a new user setting. So guess what? I sit down at Joe Blow's editing facility. Guess what? As soon as I create a new user setting called Kevin P. McAuliffe, the keyboard is already laid out in a fashion that I know, and I can start editing immediately. And then when the client goes to get a coffee, then I can get in and sort of quickly adjust my F keys and then hit Shift and add those 2 extra commands in there. So that's why I always tell editors, don't ever mess with this keyboard here. Leave it the way it is. So, buyer beware in this case. I guess it's more editor beware. But, editor beware, if you get in and change that keyboard, be prepared that you're going to need to be changing it every time you sit in front of a new machine. Okay, so to simply change these 2 commands, very easy. All I'm going to do is take my step forward 1 field, I'm going to drag it and drop it over top of the button. I'm going to take step backwards 1 field, and I'm going to drag it and drop it over top of that 1 button. And that's how to do a basic button-to-button reassignment. Now, I'm going to skip over the active palette for just a second, and we're going to get back to that because I want to talk about the next option, which is a menu-to-button reassignment. Now, what exactly does that mean? Well, this actually used to be sort of a hidden feature inside of Media Composer that was sort of one of those things that only certain editors knew about it, and it was always cool when you saw someone did it, and they would always say, oh, yeah, well, it's a little trick that I know, sort of an old editor's trick. And basically, this was something that was added a little while back into the command palette, and it's the ability to map any menu item onto any part of your keyboard, or really any other part of the interface, basically right under the Composer window or at the top of your timeline, any menu command you might need. So let me give you an example. So let's just say, I don't know, batch import is something that I do on a regular basis. And what I want to do is I'm actually going to assign batch import to be, let's say, Shift F3, just for argument's sake. So what I'm going to do is, instead of having button-to-button reassignment selected, I'm going to choose menu-to-button reassignment. What I'm going to do, you'll see that the icon is now changed when I move it away from the command palette. And I move it over top of a button, you'll see that this icon now looks a little bit different. It almost looks like an old sort of film strip. What it's basically asking me is, what button do you want to map this to? So what I'm going to do is come up to the keyboard, I'm going to hold Shift, and I'm going to click on F3. And as soon as I do, I can let go of Shift, and you'll see now that F3 is highlighted. So basically what Media Composer wants me to do now is to tell it what I want to map there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to navigate up to, let's just say, oh, I don't know, clip, and I said batch import, so let's come down to batch import, and you'll see all of a sudden the keyboard snapped back. Well, if I hold Shift again, you'll see that batch import is now mapped to F3 on the keyboard, which is very, very cool. Now, what would also be kind of cool is if I could take sort of any menu item. You'll see it is a menu-to-button reassignment, but you'll see I was talking about the menu up at the top, but I wonder if I could take any menu item, sort of down here, and map it to anywhere else inside of the Composer window or on my keyboard. Well, I bet I can. Let's say that showing audio waveforms is something that I do pretty much on a regular basis, and I do sort of toggle it on and off from time to time. Now, somewhere I'd want to have that mapped to is probably inside of my Composer window, my Record window over here, maybe all the way over at the right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over top of Extract, which I'm not going to use. I'm simply going to click on that button. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to navigate down to the little hamburger here, and I'm going to click on it. I'm going to navigate up to Audio Data, and I'm going to select Waveform. And you'll see that as soon as I select it, it has now been updated over here inside of my Composer window underneath the Record window. So now if I happen to have audio in this timeline, as soon as I hit the waveform button, the waveforms would appear and show me all of the audio information visually for me to work with it. So you'll see menu to button reassignment, also a very handy way to get in and not only map items to the keyboard, but also map items essentially to anywhere that there is a free button, or not, in this case, not even a free button. You'll see that I just overwrote something that was there because I didn't really use it. So this is how you can get in and really change things up. What I also like to do is actually, I'm just going to come back to button reassignment for a second. I believe it's either in Other or in More. There it is right there, blank. So if there's buttons you never use, like for example, I can come over here, I can just drop a blank one right there because that's not something I ever use. Let's see, anything else here? Locator I don't use. Why? Because I already have locator mapped on my keyboard to be F4, so I don't really need it there either because I'll just hit F4 if I want to add a locator inside the preview window or inside the record window. Okay. So let's wrap up our look at our keyboard settings by talking about the active palette. Now, active palette's not something that I really use pretty much ever, but you'll see where the value of it comes in just a second. I'm going to switch over to the active palette. Now you're going to notice that as soon as I do, I lose that little icon to do the menu to button reassignment, and I can't actually take anything and drag it anywhere. So what exactly does the active palette do? Well, let me give you an example. What I'm going to do is just come back to my bin here. I'm going to come to the boxing clips, and I'm just going to grab some last shot. Sure, why not? And what I'm going to do on the keyboard is hit G to remove that in and out point. But what I actually want to do is I want to add an in and out point. Let's say hypothetically I didn't have it mapped to my keyboard and I didn't have it mapped right here on the composer window. Well, what I can do right now is I can actually come back and let's just come to the play section. And let's say I wanted to play this clip and see it. Well, I can actually play it from right here, and as soon as I click play, it's going to start playing. And I can just click play again to stop it. You'll see I can come over to edit, and I can actually mark an out point right from here. I can come back to play. I can play that in reverse. Let's just say maybe to about, I don't know, there. I can come back. I can mark an in point. What I can do now is come right down to the end of my timeline, and then I could come in and actually overwrite that into my timeline. Now it overwrote everything that was there because I have an in and out point mark. So I'm just going to hit G on my keyboard to remove that, and I can actually hit overwrite. So conceivably I could do all of my editing from the command palette if I wanted to. Now you're probably wondering, well, you said you didn't really use it very much. Why is that? Well, really, I have all the commands I need mapped on my keyboard and on my composer window. Where would I use something like this? Well, first of all, I'd probably want to have two monitors because as you'll see, screen real estate, really, I don't have that much of it. So for me to have the command palette up all the time on a one screen display, a little bit cumbersome. Where would I use this? Let's say I happen to be working on a show where there was one command that I didn't necessarily want to map to my keyboard, but it was something I was going to use all the time for that one specific project. If I was working in a dual monitor situation, I'd stick the command palette on one side and I would just leave it up, let's just say, I don't know, in FX for the quick transition, even though I would never use it for that. But hypothetically, if quick transition was something I was only going to use inside that one project, I'd keep the command palette open, keep active palette up, and just click on it there and not worry about mapping it to my keyboard because I know that I'm only going to be using it inside of that one project. Okay, so I hope that after watching this tutorial, you're going to remember a couple things. One, don't get in and mess with the standard keyboard keys on your keyboard. Get in and adjust the Shift keyboard and your function keys. So that way when you sit down in front of any version of Media Composer or Symphony, you'll be up and running in seconds instead of minutes. And I hope you're also, after this tutorial, going to get in and really customize your layout, customize your composer window, customize those buttons right above your timeline to really give you the tools that you're going to work with on a regular basis and really help speed up your overall editing workflow. So if you have any questions, you have any comments, or you have any tutorial requests, you can send them to kevinpmcauliffe@gmail.com. This has been Kevin P. McAuliffe. Thanks a lot for watching.